10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 67. Hey, 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family, welcome to episode 67. My name is Nick Manella, and I am the creator and host of the show. We are so glad you're here. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to everybody that tunes into this podcast every single week. We love you guys. Keep tuning in. We hope to keep bringing you some of the best jazz instruction around. What we do here every week, if you're new to the show, is we bring you a short and concise, right around 10-minute jazz lesson covering a particular topic that you can practice for the week or the month or the year or whatever. And all these episodes come complete with a downloadable PDF, which you can find at 10minutejazzlesson.com. That's the number 10minutejazzlesson.com. Lots of cool stuff over there. Hey, if you're looking for a way to support this podcast, please consider joining the Inner Circle. We've got some really, really big changes on the horizon that come along with this membership. Right now, you get a complete transcription every month, plus the useful vocabulary pulled out of that transcription and put on a separate sheet for you so that you have a bunch of vocabulary to work on every single month. But what we're going to do in the future, the very near future, which I'm working on right now, is we're going to turn this into a full-fledged video jazz lesson website. So I'm working on my first course for the 10-minute jazz lesson Inner Circle members. Should be done in the next couple of weeks. And then every couple of weeks thereafter, we're going to launch a brand new course covering in depth, which we can't always do on these podcast episodes. We're going to go way, way, way in depth on some of my favorite concepts in jazz. So the first course that I'm working on for you guys right now is a major triad pair course, and we're going to cover it from A to Z. So we're going to go from the initial concept of what major triad pairs are, and we're going to cover that all the way up to some really, really intense, in-depth, advanced stuff on triad pairs. And like I said, there's going to be tons of other courses coming out. So instead of selling our courses on our website, they're going to be part of this membership that only costs you $10 a month. So please consider going over and signing up for that today. Instantly upon signing up, you'll get access to all of the archived transcriptions. I think at this point there's 5 or 6 of them. And then in the future, you will get complete and exclusive access to all of the courses that we will be putting up there. We definitely need your support as this podcast keeps growing, which is totally amazing. There's people from all over the world listening to it. We definitely need your support. Our hosting fees are going up. The amount of time that I have to spend doing the podcast is going way, way up. And we've got some really, really exciting stuff for you in the future. So if you've got $10 a month to spare, please consider joining that Inner Circle. You can find it on the Inner Circle tab on our website. All right, without further ado, let's get into the episode. So today, we're going to talk about a sad affliction that affects so many jazz musicians from around the world. And this affliction is called Root-itis. And I don't know if that's an official term, by the World Health Organization, but I for sure have seen it in many, many, many of my students and many people that I've listened to improvise. The problem is that we tend to center around the root of a chord. And there's several different reasons for this. First of all, it's the easiest note to pick out in a chord, obviously. If you think about a C7 chord, you're going to think about a C first. It's very natural. It's our natural progression of thought to see a certain chord and then play the note that is the root of that chord. Now, the other thing is that when you're reading printed chord changes, the note that you're actually staring at on the page is the root, right? Pretty much always. Well, really always, it's going to be the root. So overcoming that initial reaction to play the root is a really, really tough thing to do because it requires a sort of a leap in skill level to look at one note on the page and then play a different note. Now, starting on the root is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not something that you can never do without exception, you know what I mean? But the problem is that if you always start on the root, no matter what, your solos are going to become fairly predictable. And the other thing about it is that the root is not really the most interesting note. I mean, think about what happens on beat one when a chord changes. The bass player always plays the root, right? So you're going to be basically doubling the bass player. And that's going to be okay for a little while, but then soon after, your solos are going to start to become kind of boring melodically. And like I said, they're also going to become very predictable. And we don't want to be predictable as jazz musicians. I mean, think about some of the favorite jazz musicians that you listen to. One of the big reasons that you listen to them, I'm willing to bet, is that you never know what they're going to do next. And they continue to impress and amaze you with the stuff they're playing. So for a jazz musician, becoming predictable is kind of the kiss of death. That doesn't mean that you can't repeat yourself. I mean, if you listen to some of the greats in history like Sonny Rollins or really anybody, even Charlie Parker, they repeat themselves all the time, but not verbatim, and I don't feel like they ever become predictable. So those are the things that we're trying to avoid. So let's talk about how to start curing this horrible disease that so many jazz musicians have. Basically, what it comes down to is you have to start practicing, consciously practicing, very, very carefully, starting on some of the other chord tones besides the root. And I say chord tones because that's sort of the natural next step for us, is to start beginning your phrases on different chord tones. Don't worry about all the different notes in the scale at this point. Just worry about chord tones. So if you look at example number 1 on your exercise sheet for this week, we're going back to our good old chord progression, the blues, and this is as good of a place to start as any. You can use a different tune. If there's a tune that you've been working on that you would like to try to avoid using the root on, go ahead and start with that one. But I start with the blues because it's a chord progression that we're all familiar with, and something that is not that complicated to work on something that could be difficult for you, like this concept. So if you look at example number 1, I'm still arpeggiating the chord, but instead of starting on the root, I'm starting on the third. So instead of playing 1, 3, 5, 7, I'm playing 3, 5, 7, 1. So I'm simply just, switching up the order with which I'm playing it. And I get really, really in depth on this concept in our 60 Days to Crushing the Blues course. So if this is something that you want more help on, make sure you purchase that course because this will really, really go into it. So basically, I'm just going to play 3, 5, 7, 1 instead of 1, 3, 5, 7. Therefore, I have to make that mental leap to starting on the third. Now on this one, it's really, really important that you can start by reading this exercise off the page, but fairly quickly, I'm going to want you to actually do this from memory because it's not really going to help us if we're reading that third off the page. What we really need to do is look at the chord symbol like B flat 7 and think about D as the first note that we're playing instead of B flat. Okay, here's what this exercise sounds like though, and then you can go and work on it on your own and make sure that you memorize it. So if you've practiced your 1, 3, 5, 7, you'll be able to hear how much more melodic that particular exercise is just by starting on the third. The third is such an interesting note, right? And it's one of the most melodic notes that you can play. It's also a guide tone. All this stuff is great about the third. So if you're having trouble starting on the third in any of your phrases, that's a great exercise. So now we move on to exercise number 2, which is going to be a scale exercise starting on the third. So instead of going up the chord tones now, we're going right up the scale to the 6th or the 13, and then back down to the third in every single measure. Exactly the same concept, it's just that now we're doing it with a scale instead of the chord tones. Here's what that exercise sounds like. So a nice, different kind of flavor, using a little bit more scale based line, a little bit more of a horizontal line instead of a vertical line. But you got to practice both. That's the important part here. You guys know that. I firmly believe that you have to practice both in order to be a complete improviser. Now, here's the thing. You can't only do this on the third, or you're going to become somebody who starts everything on the third, right? So the next step is to practice these same exercises starting on the fifth and the seventh, and then if you're really starting to get advanced, you can start them on the ninth, the sharp 11th, the 13th. There's really no end to what you can do with this stuff. So be creative, come up with your own exercises, and make sure that you don't just stop at the third. That's really, really important, because you could become equally as predictable a player if you always start on the third. So make sure that you're covering all your bases. I know it's a lot of work, but everything in jazz is a lot of work. So make sure you send me any questions that you might have on this. I really think this is going to improve a lot of your playing out there, because I do see this as one of the biggest issues with, like I said, a lot of my students and a lot of people that I listen to play. I know I had to work on it for a long time, so this might be a great place to spend your time over the coming weeks. All right, everybody, we will see you on the next episode. Please consider going to join that inner circle. We need your support. We run on listener support. And if you enjoy the show and you listen to it every single week, give us that $10 a month. It would really, really help us out, especially if you can afford it. That would be great. All right, that's it from me. Thanks for tuning in as always. Love you guys, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.